Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, the weirdest Yoshi game yet, Bomberman gets an upgrade, and an iconic movie crossover. Hi, I'm your host Jared, and today is September 8th, 1993. Several years before he was hanging out with the Rabbids, Mario got a gun. Released in September 1993 for the Super NES, was Yoshi's Safari. Yoshi's Safari is a light gun game. Ride Yoshi and use the Super Scope to blast all kinds of iconic Mario enemies. Flying Goombas, Paratroopas, and Pootaboos. Get coins and power-ups. You can also shoot walls to change pathways, and unique to the game is sometimes you'll need to jump. Face off against the Koopalings and Bowser and all kinds of mechs and various other adversaries at the end of each level. Yoshi's Safari is one of 12 Super Nintendo games that are compatible with the Super Scope.
Now two can play the games of the Super NES Super Scope, Yoshi Safari and Metal Combat Falcon's Revenge. So to prepare yourself, you might want to consider some basic training exercises.
The best play here!
The Super Scope was the follow-up to the incredibly popular NES Zapper, only it was designed to look more like a bazooka because they wanted it to look cool against whatever Sega had. Also, it's just such a 90s thing to say the word bazooka. Bazooka gum? Bazooka Joe? Anyone? Alright. You don't actually play as Yoshi. You do play as Mario riding on the back of Yoshi in first-person view, and he is wielding that cannon in cutscenes. Instead of saving the Mushroom Kingdom, Princess Peach sets them off to Jewelry Land, where Bowser has invaded. This is also the first Mario game that refers to Peach as Princess Peach and not Princess Toadstool, although nobody cared until Mario 64. There's also a co-op mode. One person uses the Super Scope and fires, and another player can use the controller to move Yoshi, helping him dodge and jump. Or one player can play both, using their hands and their feet. This is the third Yoshi game that released within a year of each other. The NES and the Game Boy got Yoshi near the end of 1992, and earlier in 1993, the NES and Super NES got Yoshi's Cookie. Sadly, people did not have much interest in Yoshi's Safari. Support for the Super Scope was limited due to the tepid response. Nintendo really wanted to sell plastic, so they developed Yoshi's Safari specifically to use the brand recognition to boost sales of the Super Scope. It was made to be the marquee game. The graphics are actually impressive, with huge sprites for bosses and enemies. It heavily used the Mode 7 graphics of the Super Nintendo, and it had Mario in it. It didn't work. It just didn't move many copies and pretty much spelled the end of the Super Scope. Excitement for it was also lackluster. Previews and reviews for it were late. Electronic Gaming Monthly didn't preview it until their September issue, where they said it wasn't even coming out until the end of the year. Nintendo Power didn't preview it until their December 1993 issue, where they talked about a bunch of Super Scope games. But they still reviewed it back in their September issue, the same one as Mario All-Stars. There, they graded it highly with an average score of a 3.75 out of 5. Definitely not biased there. However, other outlets like GamePro magazine awarded it a flat 3 out of 5, noting how easy it was. And Electronic Gaming Monthly was divisive. 6s, 7s, and a 4 out of 10. Yoshi Safari was a commercial failure. It was a standalone game that required the Super Scope, and its primary competition, releasing just a few days later, was Mortal Kombat, which more than a few people were excited for. However, these days, Yoshi Safari is considered to be one of the best Super Scope games you can play, and it's never been ported or re-released for any other platform. Why have one game come out that wants an accessory when you can have another? Also released this week in 1993 was Super Bomberman for the Super NES. Super Bomberman is an action puzzle game. Play as Bomberman going through multiple single-screen levels, dropping bombs everywhere to destroy enemies and blocks. Reveal power-ups for more firepower and extra abilities, and defeat every enemy to find the exit. Some levels feature a large, oversized boss, and the whole thing can be played in co-op. But of course, the best way to play is the 4-player battle mode against other players and computer-controlled bombers. Super Bomberman was developed and published by Hudson Soft. Every other Bomberman up to this point was made for the NES and the TurboGrafx 16. Of course, the biggest draw was the fact that it had 4-player multiplayer. The chaos of it all. 4 players all dropping bombs, explosions everywhere, alliances forged and broken. To ensure that people could experience the glory that is 4-player Bomberman, the original release of the game included the multi-tap, an accessory that allowed up to 4 players to be plugged in it. It also meant that the game came in a very large box, which was awesome. Super Bomberman is the first Super Nintendo game that could be played up to 4 players. Plus, this multi-tap could be used for plenty other Super NES games, like more Bombermans. Nintendo Power issue 53 showed off the game a bit across 4 pages, mostly the single-player mode, but let's be real, the most eye-catching thing was not the weird-looking 3D Bomberman render, but that blurb that says 2 to 4 players. The concept of a home console allowing more than 2 people was practically unheard of, and that alone got people talking, especially since it included a photo of the multi-tap. Technology that was beyond our imagination and comprehension. Of course, that made it super fun to play, and people loved it. Nintendo Power gave it pretty good remarks. GamePro magazine was also very high, and EGM gave it a 9 out of 10 along with the Game of the Month award. Naturally, it did well enough to get numerous sequels. Super Bomberman 2 would come out 1 year later, and the SNES would get Super Bomberman 3, 4, and 5, all of which would never get released in the West. But the third one was released in Europe. Of course, Bomberman is still going strong today, although he is now owned by Konami, so I use the word strong loosely. One of the coolest arcade games comes to home console. Oh wait, no it didn't. Also released for the Super NES was Alien vs. Predator. Alien vs. Predator is a side-scrolling beat-em-up. Play as the Predator, going left to right, pummeling all manner of alien that comes your way. Punch, kick, and throw them. Also find weapons to use, such as that bladed disc thing and a spear. You can also press the X button to charge your shoulder cannon to blast away. Defeat bosses and all kinds of bizarre, mutated alien. Movie fans of the 80s had all the dream matches they could think of. Freddy vs. Jason, RoboCop vs. Terminator, and of course, Alien vs. Predator. What started as lunchroom debates inflated in popularity that it became an actual thing. In 1989, a comic book series called Alien vs. Predator from Dark Horse Comics ran for a handful of issues, fueling the debate of who would win in the fight, the alien or the Predator. The comic line and the rabid fan base around it got companies to adapt it into a video game, such as with Alien vs. Predator for the Super Nintendo. It was developed by the same studio that made the SNES game Musia and published by Activision. Now, when people think of Alien vs. Predator the video game, the first thing that jumps to mind is the 3-player co-op beat-em-up arcade game from Capcom. That game rules. Over-the-top action, combo attacks, bombastic screen-clearing attacks, and huge weapons to use. The SNES Alien vs. Predator is not that at all. The Capcom arcade game that so many love didn't release until 1994. These games are entirely unrelated. This Alien vs. Predator game sucks. Despite the premise, it's as generic as it gets, boring, and worst of all, only single player. You can even find a power-up that turns the Predator invisible with his camouflage, but it doesn't do anything because the aliens can find and attack you anyway? What's the point? Of course, Nintendo Power tried to say it was decent with a 3.3 out of 5 average score, but they also said one of the most positive features of the games was that you can use continues. Other outlets, such as the UK magazine Games Master, called it one of the worst SNES games of all time and awarded it a 15%. I think that's still better than the movies though. And now for Dylan versus everything else released this week, here's Editor Dylan.
More like Dylan versus racing games. We got mostly racers this week, so let's start off with the most unique one. The Genesis had Dashing Desperados, which is a side-scrolling platformer starring 2 very desperate men. You remember the split-screen racing mode in the 2D Sonic games? Well, imagine if that turned into a fully fledged game. Only the objective is to, let's say, woo this Jenny person. She goads them into killing each other for a chance to get a kiss on the cheek. And Jenny doesn't care who it is. She'll smooch anyone who who reaches her first. I feel like I'm missing something here. Why her? Is it the overly bit-crushed voice? Is it the blonde hair? Is it the pigtails? Is it the pixelated cleave? Probably. But enough about the Super Simp brothers. Let's talk about a more traditional racing game. GP1 on the SNES is a decent motorcycle racer. I don't know why, but I tend to enjoy racing games a lot more when it's not just, a car on a racetrack meant for cars. I much more prefer niche vehicles or unique settings like Hydro Thunder or F-Zero GX. And to me, motorcycles tend to feel better for turning and maneuvering than standard car racers. And GP1 is no different. But unfortunately, we got another car racer to talk about, and it has a generic name. Battle Cars for the SNES hopefully offers more than just car racing like the name suggests. And forgive me for the sudden change in tone, but we got a hidden gem alert! This game is like a mature-themed Mario Kart with the look and feel of F-Zero, and the tone and setting of rock and roll racing. You get cash to upgrade your sweet ride, and win credits to upgrade your arsenal like rockets, grenades, and green shells. I mean, discs. The post-apocalyptic setting is inhabited by a slew of interesting characters, ranging from cybernetically enhanced raiders to mutants to even aliens, all with their own quirky personalities and vehicles. Namco, how many gems are you sitting on? First Great Greed, now this? Okay, let's take a break from racers for a sec with Lock On. It's a solid flight combat sim that's fun, fast-paced, and the Mode 7 kinda reminds me of F-Zero. Damn it, I can't get my mind off of racers now. Well, thankfully, we only got one more this week called Redline F1 Racer. Like Nigel Mansell's World Championship Racing, it's not bad in the slightest. It's just not my thing. But don't sleep on a game just because someone else doesn't like it. Otherwise, you might miss out on another abrupt tone shift. Hidden gem alert! I have been listening to Redline's soundtrack for the entirety of editing this video, and I'm still not tired of it. I know music is subjective, but for me, it hits all the perfect vibes. I would turn on Top Gear on the SNES and just jam out to the tunes for hours. And I know for a fact I would have done the same for this game as well. It's so good! Listen to this! That's my peanut butter and jam right there. 8 games released on these two consoles this week in 1993. I love being surprised by a game I normally wouldn't play. And don't be offended if someone doesn't care for a game you are passionate about. Everyone has different tastes and preferences, and that's a good thing. Like for me, I don't like sports and I don't like cars. And don't even get me started on sports cars. But if I didn't try games with those things in them, I never would have found amazing gems like Crash and the Boys or Battle Cars, or that funky fresh soundtrack to Redline. So try something outside your comfort zone, and you may find something you didn't know you really enjoyed. Good luck out there.
Thanks, Dylan. Here in the collector's corner, Yoshi Safari has gone pretty ignored. It released costing only $39.95, and now it's worth $12, and right at $45 with it complete. Super Bomberman released costing $69.95, bundled with that multi-tap. Now the game alone is only $40. A complete one though, with the multi-tap, the manual, styrofoam insert, and that big box is worth $300. Alien vs. Predator is bad, but still just obscure enough. It cost $64.95 when it came out, and now the game itself is $35, and the complete one isn't too bad at $180. And that's it for today. Next week, the finest run-and-gun game for the Sega Genesis you can think of, another company's attempt at a mascot, and it has begun! I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. I want to thank some patrons like Taggy, Super Bunny Bun, and Bozo Lumix. Please like the video and leave a comment down below, especially if you played any of the games that we talked about this week, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you already are a subscriber, thank you so much for watching the show every single Friday. I also want to take a moment to thank every single one of you for watching and for helping this channel grow to 50,000 subscribers. We couldn't be more excited and more ecstatic for the future. Thank you so much for your support and helping us grow. If you want to keep helping us grow, tell your friends. Unless you hate the channel, then tell your enemies.